Hey guys, it's Kevin. It's today's video. So the last couple of days I've been trying to figure out what to make my post about, and I figured there were a couple of things that I had noticed that I wanted to get out there and just kind of talk to you guys about. And specifically, a couple of days ago, you'll remember I made a post concerning race and how if you feel that people of color are having a discussion, or if you're reading something and it's about race or white privilege, and you start to get a little offended and you feel like you want to defend yourself, that's the most important time that you just sit down and listen so you can learn something. I really wanted to kind of continue up on that because I saw a couple of posts of people, saying, well, maybe we don't want to get paired up with white racists. Again, if you're being offended, it's not necessarily that you're being racist, but that post was also about white privilege, and you're completely ignoring that. I hate to break it to you, but even if you haven't done anything outright racist, you've gone through white privilege if you're white, and that is just something that you just need to sit down. It's not an attack on you. It's people merely pointing out, hey, this is something that's going on, so we're trying to get you to keep from doing that, or so that you can acknowledge it. Experiencing white privilege doesn't make you a bad person. I don't think it reflects on you personally. It reflects on you poorly if you refuse to admit it and you refuse to accept that it exists. I wanted to bring up a couple of points that I have always wanted to tell a lot of people that I've seen on here, but I figured maybe on video it might come off a little better than just writing it, since I know that in words on read things I can come off as a little angrier than I actually am. Number one, if you're a white person and you have friends of color who don't care about the things you say, please stop using that as a defense. Your friends of color do not speak for the entire community. So if they're saying it's okay, you run into a different group of people of color, they're telling you, hey, what you're doing is not okay, just shut up and listen to them. Don't start saying, my black friends let me say the N-word, or my Latino friends let me say this, or my Asian friends let me say that. That's them. And they can be telling you they don't care. I mean, it sucks, but unfortunately all of that seeps into people of color. That's why people of color will put light-skinned people of color on a pedestal over darker skin. Do you really think that doesn't come from white racism? Because it does. That's where it comes from. So again, if you feel the need to defend yourself, that's the time to listen and stop defending yourself because you have a boyfriend or girlfriend or best friends who are of color. They might not be saying anything to defend you, but in their heads they're probably saying all the worst kinds of things about you that they can. They're just not telling you because you're their friend. Number two, I see this a lot, and especially when it comes in terms of finding jobs or socioeconomic standing. White privilege and socioeconomic standing are not the same thing. So people aren't saying all white people are rich. No, of course we acknowledge that, but white people can be poor. But you guys have a much higher percent of likelihood of getting out of that because of your skin color versus people of color. That's all we're asking you to identify. I hate to break it to you again, but white privilege trumps socioeconomic privilege. The reason that is because no matter what, if you're white, the general assumption is going to be that you probably come from money, whether you do or you don't. That's just going to be it. And white people are going to assume this as much as people of color. And you might not. In the same sense, somebody of color who comes from money is likely still going to be considered to not come from money. I remember reading a post a few weeks ago about a girl who was at the grocery store with her hands in her pocket, and somebody assumed she was stealing. That happens to a lot of my friends of color, regardless of whether they have money or not. It's just assumed that they don't come from money. I have a good friend, he's half black, and it's assumed, people are always surprised that he lives in such a nice big home. Everybody just assumes that he should be living in the ghetto somewhere. That's what I'm saying. White privilege will still trump socioeconomic privilege, whether you're rich or not. And lastly, I'm shocked I even feel the need to say this, but you have to stop thinking that just because you would sleep or go out with someone of color that you're somehow not racist. I don't know where that idea comes from. It's crazy, and it is tricky because I do always talk about how having the preference of saying only into whites and not into these kinds of people of color is racist. Going on the opposite end of the spectrum and saying you're only into a certain person of color and fetishizing is also racist. It sounds, I know if you're a white person, you're listening to this, it probably seems like you can't win. feels like it, believe me, and it's even confusing sometimes while being a person of color. But yeah, just don't. That is, both of those ends are racist, and I'm not in any way condoning color blindness. That's dumb. But you have to be able to date someone, acknowledge that they're of a certain race. That's fine. You can do that. Do it respectfully, but don't exoticize it. Don't fetishize it. Don't make it a bigger thing than it is, because for us, it's not a big deal. I mean, I'm Mexican, and yeah, I grew up in certain customs, but to me, that's just every day. That's not some crazy thing. It's not like I came to the U.S. and I was flabbergasted at everything that was different. It's just, it's different. It's not like I look at white people and I obsess about cheeseburgers and baseball or whatever. It's just that. It just, in the same way that your race isn't a big deal, everyday issue for you, it isn't really for us for the most part. It's only when it comes to issues of racism. And one final point, I guess I should add forth, so the last one wasn't the last one. You have to stop assuming, as mostly as white people, that racism only comes in extremes. That if you're not a KKK member and you're not actively hurting people of color physically, that you're somehow not racist, or that people are being too sensitive. It's no. And there's a post I saw the other day that I actually really liked, that it brought up something called casual racism, and it gave me a perfect term to use for that. Is that if you're, I mean, and I've found myself guilty of it in the past as well. These are just things that are so ingrained in us, and they're racist thoughts. I mean, speaking of the last thing, in terms of preferences and dating, to you it seems innocuous to say I'm not attracted to black people, when you're really saying, of the black people that I've met, I haven't been attracted to any of them. There's a very big difference between that and saying that about an entire race of people, many of whom you will probably never even meet. And so that's the casual part that I like about it. They seem innocuous, they seem harmless. Maybe you're cut off by a bad driver and they happen to be Asian, and your brain just goes to Asians are bad drivers. That is still a huge generalization if you're making. And again, it seems innocuous. It seems like it's not a big deal. You're not hurting them. You're not putting their life at stake. But it's still racist. It might be a lower level, but because it's such a casual thing and it's so pervasive in life, it's in some ways it's just as damaging. So yeah, just stop. If somebody tells you, hey, that's racist, just listen. Don't try to defend yourself so that you can keep saying it. It's not cool at all. In the same sense, if you're a male and a girl is telling you, hey, this isn't cool, we don't like this, just listen. And I see posts that generalize all men. You know what? A lot of them, even if we're gay, we do a lot of misogynistic shit, and I have a better chance of learning something if I just sit down and see what they're saying, and maybe finding that I've done some of those things in the past, than if I just defend myself and start acting like not all men or not all of these people. You're not going to learn anything from defending yourself that way. Just sit down, listen, and that's, if you really want people of color, any women, any marginalized subgroup of people, and to not generalize, you listen and prove it to them. Don't just tell them you're a nice person, and maybe you'll both grow in both senses, that they'll start making their generalizations, and you'll learn to not keep doing the things you've been doing in the past that are hurtful. Okay, that's today's video. Hopefully I didn't drag out too long. Remember to subscribe to Bromancing-the-Stone here on YouTube. Go ahead and ask me anything you guys would want me to talk about in the future at Bromancing-the-Stone on Tumblr. And yeah, you guys have a great weekend.